Hello, BookTube. We're continuing on with our library tour, our interminable, endless library tour. Long may it rain. And we are in the darkest depths of Mordor. We are in this recessed hutch in this wall that I have filled with books. Books that I admit I don't often look at, often enough to keep them, which is why this library tour is helping a lot, because it's forcing me to hold and look and think about each individual book. And that is a winnowing process that not a lot of these books can survive, or will survive at the end of the year. But we're just going to continue. We're doing the top shelf where I have stacked, just vertically stacked mass market paperbacks, most of the last mass market paperbacks that I have. So we're just going to go through those stack by stack. I don't know how many more stacks there are, and then we'll be done with that top shelf. So we'll do the next stack now. The first one is an Oxford Mass Market World Classics paperback that are, they're very handy. Some of them are actually very good. I've made the case for the Oxford World Classic mass market paperbacks of Anthony Trollope. They did a centenary reprint of almost all of Trollope, and the editorials crew that they got together for those is wonderful. The introductions, the notes on those editions are often superb. They're often much better than the same introductions and than the notes and introductions of the same books by later editors further on in Oxford when they brought them out as trade paperbacks. This is not quite that case. This is an edition by Pat Rogers of Boswell's Life of Johnson. This is unabridged, great big fat thing. I love this Oxford brick in the hand. I absolutely love, of course, the Life of Johnson. I love Boswell's Life of Johnson, and I love the termite mound of editorial labors that it has been for 80 million editors since it was written. But I think that the current Penguin trade paperback edition of the Life of Johnson is probably the best one for the common market that I have seen. Certainly, it's more comfortable to read than this thing. I kept this because it's radically different in a lot of ways. The editorial apparatus, not the life itself, but the editorial apparatus is radically different from the Penguin. But I have gradually just dispensed in my library with all the abridged Boswell's Life of Johnsons that I've had. I've had abridgments by Signet and Mentor and all sorts, even Penguin, all sorts of things. And I have found that I just don't like them as much as the unabridged. The unabridged is a brick, but I still like it. Now we move on to science fiction. Looks like there's a lot of science fiction here. Those of you who aren't interested may want to tread carefully. This is The Many-Colored Land by Julian May. This is book 1 of the Pliocene Exile trilogy, which is got a wraparound cover. I think this is from the late 70s or early 80s. This mass market. 1981, and the Pliocene Exile books. There's a quartet of them, and I don't know that they're in print. I don't think they are. These mass market paperbacks are long since gone, and I don't know why that would be. I don't know why a publisher wouldn't just keep printing them. They had wonderful cover art by Michael Whelan. They look really nice. They look really nice together, and they're very much pulpy space opera, science fiction, fantasy. So they work well. They fit well thematically with the mass market format. I don't know if that makes any sense, but these take place in a future Earth in which mankind's latent psychic abilities, there are a handful of discrete psychic abilities, telekinesis, telepathy, that sort of thing, that have been latent in mankind and expressed, haphazardly all throughout human history, hence all of human mythology and whatnot on the subject. But recently, comparatively recently, in the setup of this book, mankind has achieved metaconcert. Mankind has become aware of these abilities and achieved their conscious manipulation, and that brought mankind to the awareness of an intergalactic milieu that brought humans on as members of that milieu. And that is the background. You have to just take all of that in one big gulp. That is the background here. But that is not the story here. That story is told elsewhere by Julian May, and really well. The story here, this preceded them all. The story here is that in that future world, a scientist in France has discovered a apparently useless anomaly. There's in one little area, there's a fixed anomaly where you can there's sort of a portal to the Pliocene era, to 6 million years ago, and nothing can come back. It's not a two-way street. You go there and you're stuck there. If you try to come back, you suffer the passage of all of those 6 million years and immediately rot to dust. Amber, for instance, things encased in unaging things like amber can make the trip back, but humans can't. And so the scientist doesn't think much of it, but it turns out that in this perfect future world where everybody's fate is decided and there's total peace and conformity, there are humans who want to make that trip one way to a French valley of 6 million years ago. They want to leave the galactic milieu for one reason or another. One of the main characters, my favorite one, was possessed. Elizabeth Orme was possessed of enormous psychic abilities and lost them in an accident, and doesn't want to go on living in a world where everyone has them but her. So she wants to make that trip. There are misfits, social misfits. There are people who want wild frontiers to conquer. Whatever the reason. It turns out that this scientist suddenly becomes host to a steady stream of pilgrims who want to go back in the past and just leave the world. And he's perfectly happy to oblige. There's nothing wrong with that. But it turns out that what this present world doesn't know, because of course no communication is possible. People go through this portal, but they can't let anybody know that they arrived, much less what they found. It turns out that 6 million years ago, an alien species crashed on Earth. Their spaceship crashed on Earth. They too have metapsychic abilities, only far greater advanced in technology. And they became aware of the portal and of dazed humans stumbling through it, and immediately started enslaving them. So this whole time, the humans who came through that portal have been either honored guests, if they were powerful enough, or slaves with, I don't know if you can make it out on the cover, but this character is holding a torque that you put around your throat. They become slaves of these aliens, and no one knows. No one in the future, in the world that is the framing device, knows anything about that. And we follow a group of characters who make that voyage, face that reality, and then have to overcome it. And it's in the course of really 3 books. The 4th book in this set is it's about a very different kind of person who leaves the present-day framing set of these books. Mark Remillard is from a very old metapsychic family. He's incredibly powerful, and he doesn't have mild personal reasons for leaving. He's a wanted fugitive. He and his band are wanted fugitives. That 4th book is called The Adversary, and I love it. There are scenes in there that I just wouldn't trade for anything. But even this first one, Julian May does a great job of describing what that prehistoric world would have been like, and a great job of describing the various alien species who have colonized Earth in this time. We know that a cataclysm is facing them, because of course they don't survive, and no trace of them survives in archaeology. So it has to be something major that gets wiped out. And even at the beginning of the 1st book, and certainly by the 2nd book, you can get the strong impression that maybe it's our band of time travelers who are going to bring about that cataclysmic end. These make terrific reading. I don't know why they're currently gone. I wish they were back. I wish there were like one big volume of the first 4. Anyway, a long digression about a wonderful... Oh, okay. I was going to say a long digression about a wonderful, cheesy old science fiction series, but cheese doesn't get any riper than this. This is Sandra Marshak and Myrna Kalbreth, 2 wonderful, wonderful science fiction writers, Star Trek fans, uber fans, from our first generation of fans, from those of us who loved the original show, fought hard to keep it on the air, fought hard a second time unsuccessfully to keep it on the air, and then couldn't get enough of it. Wrote stories and passed them around in samizdat form, gathered together a dozen, half a dozen, 2 dozen, 4 dozen people. Finally, conventions grew out of it. We started to cast our eye towards another TV show or maybe a movie. And for a long time, we didn't have any of that. For a long time, we had the repeats of the show on TV. We had the animated show and its repeats. And then we had novels that were roughly, kind of, sort of, a Wild West authorized by Paramount, but Paramount wasn't paying any attention to what was going on inside them. Obviously, they certainly weren't being vetted by corporate suits. That happened later. That happened largely in tandem with the first movie. So you get books like this. This is Star Trek Triangle by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Kalbreth, one of only a few Star Trek novels that they wrote, in which they answer, or try to, the immortal question, what would happen if Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock fell in love with the same woman? And what a woman. Sola Thane, a Federation free agent, full of action, full of passionate characterization, even if it's not corporate characterization. These Wild West Star Trek novels are, some of them, a joy to read, because you don't get anything like it now. You hardly ever get anything good in the corporate guided world of Star Trek fiction. We're going to see some of the good, because there's a lot of Star Trek here. Oh my, oh goodness gracious. Okay, all right. So Sandra Marshak and Marilyn Calbreth, just remember those two names. They were among the original cast of Dreamers, wanting Star Trek to live again. And one of the projects that they came up with, I mentioned it on this channel in this library tour, one of the projects that they dreamed up was to solicit Star Trek fiction from professional writers, semi-professional writers, and fans. And they thought they'd get a trickle, and instead they got an absolute Nile cataract of Star Trek fiction. And they put a lot of them together and made a book. And it's this. I have 2 copies of it. I don't know why. It's Star Trek The New Voyages. Look at that cover. Good Lord. Still takes my breath away, even now, after what? How long has this been? 50 years? 40 years? 1976. This came out in 1976. Good Lord. And this has some terrific stuff in it. Just terrific stories. That I got this in 76 and was blown away by it. Because it's not every story, but in the stories that are really good, the stories that really hit home, particularly a story called Mind Sifter, it really is what Sandra Marshak and Myrna Calbreth promised in their introduction to this volume. It really did feel like Star Trek again. And that was an amazing feeling. So these things will never come back into print. As far as I know, they've never been reprinted in trade paperback collection of Volume 1 and 2 or anything like that, because there were 2 volumes of these. This is Volume 1. And it's a mass market paperback that I will reread and keep forever. Every time I do, I find something new in the stories, but also every time I pick it up and reread it, I remember those days. I remember the days before Star Trek was a multi-billion-dollar franchise industry with lots of people involved who don't know anything about it. I remember those days. I remember when it was a passion kept alive by its fans. The very first time that phenomenon had ever happened. And this book takes me straight back to those days. And this is the second. This is the second book, Star Trek The New Voyages 2, which also has some terrific, terrific stuff in it. Okay. All right, well, I did warn you. This is Sandra Marshak and Myrna Calbreth. Again, they wrote a book called The Price of the Phoenix, which is my favorite Star Trek novel, even though, keep in mind, I am not saying it is the best Star Trek novel. It is most certainly not the best Star Trek novel, but it's my favorite, in which a scientist, a rogue renegade scientist named Omni, who is also a massive physical specimen from a Vulcan offshoot race, so he's not just big, he's super strong. He is a brilliant scientist, and he weds 2 pieces of Star Trek technology, the transporter and the replicator. He merges elements of those technologies to create a technology of his own that makes a perfect duplicate of a person. The Star Trek transporter breaks a person down, uses an energy beam to break a person down into their component, particles, transfers them as an energy stream from one location to another, and then reassembles them exactly as they were. The process that drives Dr. McCoy crazy. Omni invents a process that doesn't need transportation. It just takes an imprint of the person and recreates them perfectly. And he uses it, of course, on Captain Kirk. First pretending that Kirk dies. This book starts with Kirk dead. Let me read you the beginning just because I love it so much. This is from 1977. And the beginning starts like this. Dr. McCoy had one thought in his mind. Spock must be spared this. He turned hastily to the next transporter position and took Spock by the arm. The Vulcan did not even protest as McCoy led him off the platform. McCoy wanted to steer him through the corridors of the Enterprise, hustle him to the haven of sickbay, anything but let the Vulcan stay and see the security men bringing up the stretcher with the body bag. And it's Kirk, the body bag, as far as they know. I loved it. I loved it. I love this book. Not only for Omni, he's a great character, but also the Romulan commander, a character, a woman who commands a small Romulan fleet of warships in the original series. she is just immortally portrayed on the small screen. She's also an incredible character, and she's a major character in this book. And as the plot moves on, of course, a threat to Kirk will bring Spock's emotions close to the surface. And as the book moves on, readers get the strong impression, back in 1977, readers get the strong impression that one way or another, no matter what else happens with the Phoenix process, or with the Enterprise, or with Captain Kirk, one way or another, this book is going to climax in a fist fight between Mr. Spock and Omni. And that happens, and it's every bit what you were waiting for. What I was waiting for, anyway. And it was a fan success. Fans loved the book. I don't take all the credit, although I did proselytize about it endlessly. And here, 50 years later, I'm still doing that. But it was successful enough to warrant a sequel, The Fate of the Phoenix, which is twice as long. And which had, this is a bit, none of this will make any sense to those of you who weren't part of that first Star Trek generation. None of it will make any sense. But I don't know if you'll notice anything about this cover. There's nothing. There's no Enterprise. There's no member of our Enterprise 7. There's nothing like that. The only thing that's even recognizable from Star Trek is the Romulan bird of prey up in the sky. But anyway, this is twice as long. It's also terrific. There are fantastic developments that go on here. And I believe that it easily warrants a sequel. I believe there could easily have been a trilogy of Omni books. It just kills me that there never will be. Okay, all right. This next one is also a Star Trek book. There are a lot of Star Trek books here. This next one, we've seen it before on this channel. This is one of the only later Star Trek novels, Star Trek writers. One of the only writers who wrote after the movie studio took over the production of everything to do with Star Trek. Everything was licensed. Everything made money. So all of a sudden you had to vet your book through corporate suits who don't know anything about the show. And that put the brakes on a lot of the wild creativity of things like The Price of the Phoenix. But one writer was able to get around that and do a fantastic job. Her name's Diane Carey. I've praised her in connection with Star Trek many times on this channel. And I have pretty much every Star Trek novel that she wrote, because even the tossed-off ones are terrific. And this is Dreadnought, part one of a two-part series called The Fortunes of War, in which Mary Sue, the concept originated with Sandra Marshak and Mirna Culbreth, where when they were taking submissions for Star Trek New Voyages, they had a set of rules. One rule, of course, was that no major character dies or is disfigured or anything like that. But another one of their rules was no Mary Sues. In other words, don't bring on a totally unknown young female character who outdoes everybody on the show. That is unrealistic, and no fans like it. It's just wish fulfillment on the part of the writer. It's lazy, so don't do it. If you send us a Mary Sue story, we're not even going to consider it. How times change. Because not only is this, I mean, Dreadnought and Battle Stations, its sequel, are fantastic reads. Just fantastic. But that is a Mary Sue. The main character in this book is a Mary Sue. From the very start of the book, she has information no one else has when Scotty or Spock could easily have it. She has expertise that could easily be duplicated in a command crew that's been at this for 10, 15 years before she was born. It's a testament to Diane Carey's writing ability that she manages to make a good book despite having a Mary Sue front and center in the storyline, and it's the only time she ever does it. I think that Dreadnought and Battle Stations may have been her first Star Trek novels. I'm not 100% sure of that. But obviously the formula has been cast by the wayside, because the only current Star Trek TV show stars a Mary Sue. It is entirely a show about how utterly and completely and toweringly, overwhelmingly perfect the one young female main character is. Everyone else in the show is in a distant ancillary orbit to her, and she is never wrong, never insecure, never learns anything. She's perfect to begin with. And those of us who remember those old Star Trek New Voyages rules, no Mary Sues, can't help but look at that with a wry grin. That's a terrible thing to have happened to a once great franchise. Okay, all right. Then we're going to continue with more Diane Carey. This is Double Helix. This is Red Sector. As you can see, we're dealing with a very old Dr. McCoy and a very old Mr. Spock. Jim Kirk is long since gone in this book. And this is the reflection of a thing, a natural desire that happened when there were 4 Star Trek ongoing franchises. The original series was still being filmed for the big screen. Then you had the Next Generation, you had Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and you had Star Trek Voyager. And naturally, fans, Diane Carey wasn't the only one, started to want to come up with plots that would link all 4 of them together. That's really hard to do, because Kirk and Spock are 70 years before the Next Generation. Deep Space Nine is, for a long time, was stationary, no starship to go anywhere. So the action has to go to Deep Space Nine. And worst of all, Star Trek Voyager is on the other side of the galaxy. And one of the weaker ideas trying to link those was, a pathogen that lives and survives. I mainly like this book and go back to it because Diane Carey is so good at writing these characters, the iconic Star Trek 7 characters. She's so good at writing them in their age. Not as young cowboys, but as older figures. She's so good at that I just keep coming back to the book. Okay, this is another Diane Carey Star Trek novel. This is Ship of the Line. It is technically a Next Generation novel, but Diane Carey makes the very wise decision to have the Next Generation almost absent from the book because they are so boring. And the main 2 dramatic engines of the entire Next Generation were 2 characters trying to learn the slow process of growing into being more than what they are. You have Worf, a Klingon raised by humans, gradually becoming the most Klingon of them all. And the signature transformation, you have the android Data, who is in a long multi-part quest to become a feeling, thinking human being. And I used to joke when the show was on the air that if Data ever succeeds, he will be the only one on Star Trek Enterprise. Especially Captain Baldy, who is portrayed as more of an android than Data ever could be. But in this book, Diane Carey gives Jean-Luc Picard a sort of a background seat watching James Kirk in some of his original adventures. And it's all done by holographic programs, but it's done so well that I just love it. It gives me a glimpse of what it would be like if Diane Carey were given a brief to write the original episodes as novels. How unbelievably awesome that would be. So I do revisit it. Okay, this is a Star Trek novel, but it's not by Diane Carey. This is Strangers from the Sky by Margaret Wander Bonanno. This is a Star Trek novel about first contact with the Vulcans. And that make 4 first contacts with Vulcans, because you have the one in this book, and then you have another one in this book. There's one that everybody in this book remembers, but it's wrong. There's another one in this book that was right. Then you have the one from the Star Trek The Next Generation movie where the Vulcans show up at the very last minute of the movie. And then you also have Carbon Creek, an episode of Star Trek Enterprise that is just fantastic, in which Vulcans crash land on Earth a long, long time ago and technically make first contact. And this is just an absorbing book. Just absorbing and really, really emotionally powerful. A real example of what can be done even with those corporate suits looking over your shoulder, if you have the right kind of writing chops. So I recommend it all the time. People ask me, is there a really good Star Trek novel? I recommend Strangers from the Sky because it's the least wonky. I myself like Ship of the Line a lot better, but it won't make any sense to somebody who doesn't know Star Trek chapter and verse. Whereas Strangers from the Sky will make sense, and I think it will move you. Okay, all right. Okay, here we have The Price of the Phoenix and The Fate of the Phoenix again. Because when I see them, these old battered mass markets are never going to get reprinted. They were reprinted once, I think, with terrible covers. And they're never going to get reprinted again. So when I see an old mass market, I grab it. Then we have another copy of Star Trek The Motion Picture, the only Star Trek novel written by Gene Roddenberry. An adaptation of the movie, the Star Trek The Motion Picture, that has a couple of good moments. The book has a lot more moments than the movie. Okay. All right, this isn't Star Trek at all. This is another stripped copy. I've mentioned stripped mass market paperbacks, where the chain bookstores just have to send back the covers with the barcodes on them to get full credit from the publisher. So that's all they do. They don't box up the books and send them back. Instead, they strip the covers off and just throw out the books. And I always kept an eye out when I worked at a bookstore. I always kept an eye out for the massive amounts of stripped mass market paperbacks just to see if there's anything I wanted to grab. And here I grabbed Red Dragon. By Thomas Harris. No idea why. I have a hardcover with a dust jacket. No idea why I kept this thing. Okay, and then the last book for this time around was from one of those little free libraries here all over the world. I was going to say here in America, but they're all over the world. These people set up these little boxes, these little free libraries where you just open the door and take a book. The idea is you take a book and the next time you're passing by, you put one in there. And I have a few in my neighborhood walks here. And every once in a great while, I will see a book in there that I want. I've had friends of mine say, "Are you crazy? You have 1,000,000 books and you get 20 books in the mail every day. What are you doing taking books out of a little free library?" But can't I have the same fun as everybody else? I saw Casino Royale by Ian Fleming in one of those. I love the cover, so I just grabbed it. I was on a walk with Frida, and I just grabbed it. And that is it. That is our next shelf in Mordor. We'll just barrel on. We'll just continue on. We have so many more books to do before this library tour is over. So many more. but that's it for today. I'll wrap this up, and maybe we'd take the weekend off from the library tour. What do you think? But anyway, one way or another, I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.